On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Rishi Sunak says he's not aware that any other Tory candidates besides the two identified so far are under scrutiny. The Prime Minister says the party will act if an internal inquiry finds any wrongdoing. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, thinks that's not good enough.
These candidates should be suspended, they should be gone. If they were my candidates, they'd have been out and their feet would not have touched the ground. But Rishi Sunak is too weak.
The SNP says the Tories and Labour have both turned their back on Scotland's interest by refusing to consider rejoining the European Union. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davies said Prime Minister Rishi Sunak should be doing more to respond to the election betting row. Nigel Farage claims he would never defend Vladimir Putin. The Reform leader has been criticised after saying the West provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In other news, the King's sent his well wishes to his sister, who's in hospital with minor injuries and concussion. Princess Anne's thought to have been kicked by a horse on her country estate in Gloucestershire. And the cargo ship that hit a bridge at Baltimore Port last month, causing it to collapse, has now left the harbour. The Dali is heading to Norfolk to be unloaded and repaired. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 44 points at 82.82. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.18. LBC weather largely dry this evening, then some cloud and mist tonight. Patchy rain in the northwest and a low of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
I'll be joined by the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and his opposite number, Labour's Yvette Cooper, as they go head-to-head in a live immigration debate here in the LBC studio. We'll hear how they plan to tackle small boat crossings, manage sky-high net migration numbers, and handle the future of the Rwanda plan. All that and more with me, Nick Ferrari at breakfast, only on LBC.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With Vauxhall, the new electric van range designed to energise Britain.
LBC. This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Monday's Cross Question. It's 8 on LBC. With me on the panel today, to my left, Kezia Dugdale, Associate Director of the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Glasgow. She's former leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Tom McTague, to my far right. Well, I can't say far right, can I?
Please don't.
Don't get the wrong idea. He's political editor of the news and opinion site UnHerd. Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, next to him, between us, is an author and political commentator. And to my far left, sort of, Charlie Rowley, former advisor to Theresa May while she was Prime Minister, and Michael Gove during his time as Levelling Up Secretary. They're all here to take your calls. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Thank you to everyone who's sending texts in about the last hour with Neil Kinnock. Neil Kinnock, the best show ever on LBC. More, please. And they're all like that. So we will have him back, I can assure you. Right, let's go to a first question. Let me scroll it up on the screen here. It's from Paul in Manchester. Hello, Paul.
Hello, everybody. It's 20 years since the Gender Recognition Act was made law this year, and Labour today have finally done something that, in my opinion, is a bit kinder towards trans people than we've been seeing. They're going to simplify the gender recognition process, and they're going to overhaul things after 20 years. So, like I say, I do support them. I don't think they're doing enough. But does everyone on the panel support this move? And also, do we need to take transphobic crime much more seriously, have much more safe spaces for trans people? And also, what are we going to do about public toilets? Because basically, people who have transitioned, be them women changing to men or men changing to women, can't go back to the other toilets, because if a trans man goes back to a female toilet, then people are going to be wondering whether they're a trans man or a biological man. So what does the panel think of the solutions there? And by the way, I rang in. What inspired me to ring in, apart from Labour making this announcement today, is I've just been watching Michelle Dewberry on her show, and she's just been rubbishing trans people again. As if they don't exist. Has she never heard of April Ashley? Has she never heard of Julia Grant? And if trans people aren't natural, then is it the same when people go through IVF and motherhood? Is that not natural? Should we not compare the two?
Wow. Paul, thank you very much. Now, Labour plans to what they call simplify the legal process for undergoing gender transition, but its long-time supporter J.K. Rowling has accused the party of abandoning women. I think that this is an issue which every political party finds a great challenge. Kezia Dugdale, obviously, Labour's announced this new policy today. Will it make any difference?
I think it will. Let me just first start by addressing what J.K. Rowling has said, because that's a very sore thing to happen to the Labour Party, not least because when you hear J.K. Rowling talk about her story and what it was like to grow up as a single mum in Edinburgh and to find the space to write her books and build the life that she wanted for herself, she credits the last Labour government as giving her the ability to do that through the welfare system, the social security net, and Labour's incredibly proud of her story as a consequence of that. So then to lose her as a natural supporter of the party, let me say, is very sore for people who are in the Labour movement, and it will make a lot of people sit up and think. Now, what I think Labour have done today is a compromise. It's a compromise to the two polar extremes of this debate we've seen in Scotland, because the Gender Recognition Reform Act in Scotland has passed, and that removed all of the requirements to evidence medical history or 2 years living in a different gender. It scrapped all of that altogether and allowed people to self-ID. That was
supported by Labour, though, wasn't it?
It was, yes. And what you've seen in the UK Labour position actually is a move away from that. And I think that will very clearly address some of the concerns that lots of women across the country have about the ability to both advance trans rights and protect women's spaces and women's rights. I'm a feminist, I'm an LGBT activist. I've never thought there's been a contradiction between being able to advance trans rights and protect women's spaces. What Labour have done with this policy, I think, is find a very delicate, compromised way through what's become a very polarised and difficult issue.
Charlie Rowley.
Well, the first thing to say is I agree absolutely with Paul that the debate always gets reduced to, when we talk about trans people, what toilets they're going to use and what prisons we're going to bung them up in. And that is totally, totally wrong. If you are someone that is trans in this country, you've probably lived a harder life than most of us. And, look, when you go through adolescence, everybody struggles. And so the idea that you're born into the wrong body or feel as though you're born into the wrong body and want to take steps to address that, we as a society, just a caring nation, should do all that we can to support those people. I think that's absolutely fundamental. And so it does annoy me when the debate gets reduced to just to say there's toilets and more prisons. But that does happen because you've got the case of Isla Bryson in Scotland, where this was someone who identified as a woman, that was a man, who went to a female prison having attacked women. Now, that clearly signalled that probably the Gender Recognition Act in Scotland went a bit too far, I think, which is why Labour haven't, in the UK, I think, followed it fully as they've announced today. But I think it protects women. If you are someone that is obviously transgender, genuinely transgender, has gone through whether it's therapy, whether it's GP appointments, and you have lived a life for a certain amount of time, currently if it's 2 years, and then you decide to undergo that transition, then that seems to me about right, because then you are saying to society, who should love and embrace you for who you are, but it also says to women that might have the fears when we have the debates about criminal activity and people using it as a way to attack women or invade women's spaces. It gives women that protection as well, that people who are trans have undergone a lengthy period and are who they believe they are and who they say they are.
But why do Conservative politicians find it so difficult to say the kind of things that you've just said?
Well, I have no idea, because it has become such a polarised issue, and I think when things become polarised, people either entrench into their own, views, and it becomes even more divisive. And so, in order to get headlines, you have to maybe become slightly more over the top with how you describe things. But I genuinely think that, look, most people, Tony Blair got it right. People do not, it's a small minority of people, and of course you've got to look after those people, but people people across this country are talking about bread and butter issues like education, like the health service, like how we're going to build the homes that we need. People aren't sat around the table necessarily day in, day out having a conversation about gender identity and the LGBT community as much as I would want them to this month, because it's Pride Month and it's Pride next week, and we should all be celebrating diversity and celebrating those kinds of people. But in answer to your question, without rambling on, I'm not too sure why others in my party haven't been able to do that, but that's a matter for them.
Yasmin.
One of the things, I too am a feminist, and I've fought for women's rights all my life. And there are so many things that are happening to women. 3 to 4 of them are killed every week, every month, by men often that they know, right? We hardly have a public debate about that. It's only the women who are pushing that. Most rapes of women are not carried out by trans men, but by men. Okay? And I have to say this. J.K. Rowling is a great writer, but the way she is going about this, and in my view, utterly misusing her power to set off fireworks where, as Charlie actually has put it perfectly, we're talking about a diverse range of humans who have diverse sexualities. And this reminds me, I'm really old, I remember in the days of Thatcher when the Clause 28 issue was breaking out and being stoked up. They're going to do this, the gays are going to do this to our boys, right? So I am incredibly angry with J.K. Rowling and the way she's doing this, because we don't need that.
Okay, Tom McTague.
I disagree with Yasmin on that. I think I think J.K. Rowling's been very brave, actually. I think she didn't need to do this, and she's taken an awful lot of flack for it. There's nothing for her to gain in what she's doing. I think she's doing it because she believes in it, and she's worried about women's spaces, and I think that's perfectly legitimate. Yasmin may disagree with her, but I don't see anything that's other than selfless in what she's trying to do. So I think she's been quite brave. I think that the Tories have completely mishandled it, as you sort of alluded to, because when they've got into this debate, they've tried to politicise it, as Rishi Sunak did during Prime Minister's questions, and Keir Starmer had that kind of dignity about him in his response when there was the mother of the murdered teenager who was in there watching on. And so Keir just looked like the bigger man. And I think you're seeing that play out over and over again when Conservative MPs are trying to use things as a kind of culture war, and Keir looks like he's rising above it. I do think, ultimately, I agree with Kezia and Charlie that this is a particularly difficult issue, and I think there are sometimes I've had friends, feminist journalist friends, who have suffered tremendous abuse for trying to point out their particular concerns about women's spaces. So I think there has been an awful lot of heat, too much heat on it, and I think the debate has moved, and it probably has moved in part because of protests that female journalists have been making for a long time and have been getting an awful lot of abuse for it.
I'm sorry, we who are not taking their side, and some of them are my very good friends, the feminists, journalists who've taken a position, they can take the position, but we who do not see the world in those terms, the way they wish us to. And I think J.K. Rowling is frankly on a power trip here. You know, the young actors she brought on have different views, and she's gone for them as well. But the abuse,
they've gone for her.
But she's then gone back on them. So she can't own people's views. And if you think that the attacks are all on one side, I can show you. I've stayed away from this debate because I have enough people who want to do whatever they want to me. But a time comes, and I think that the election, we do need clarity. And these people, we do need to be more kind to people who have decided that they're in the wrong gender. And there's not been that much kindness.
Okay. Paul, thank you very much. A very provocative question. We'll come to another one in just a moment. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8. Krista says, where's Helena Kennedy? Was looking forward to hearing her. She's a bit unwell at the moment, so we will have her back as soon as she's back on fighting form. But in the meantime, we are joined by Kezia Dugdale, who is former Scottish Labour Party leader, Tom McTague from UnHerd, Charlie Rowley, former advisor to Theresa May, and Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, author and political commentator. Let's go to James in Ayr. Hello, James.
Hello, good evening, Ian. Can I preface my question by saying that I am 66 and of pension age? Today I learned that the cost of annual pensions in the UK, that is state pension, is £125 billion. My question is, who's paying this? And is it the case that young people are being impoverished by paying pensions to old people, many of whom don't require it? And is it not time that the state pension was actually means-tested?
Oh, wow. Yasmin?
Since I'm the only pensioner on your panel.
Well, I'm not far off.
I'm deep into it after 10 years now. Very good question. It's a very good question. And I completely agree with you when you say that we should now bring in means testing for those who need it, because there is a large group of pensioners who do need to have the annual supplements or biannual increases. But many of us are really being spoilt by this. And I don't think the country should sacrifice the young and please us because we tend to vote. I'm so against this now that, if I could, I would give it to two young people, whatever they give me.
Well, you could do.
Yeah. Because I don't need it, and it's unfair.
Tom and Charlie, would all be grateful to you?
You're not teenagers and 20-year-olds yet. No, but I really do think.
But don't you think the principle of the universal state pension is a good one, in that everyone contributes to it through their tax and national insurance, so therefore surely everyone should benefit from it?
No, but it doesn't work like that, does it? We live in a society. Whether you like it or not, it is a collective. And if you know that you can afford to let go of some of your benefits so others will get what they don't have, why would you not do it?
Can you imagine any political party putting in their election manifesto, we're going to abolish the state pension?
No, not abolish it.
Well, no, but I mean, that's how it would be portrayed by the other party.
It's the same with these freedom passes, okay? It's wonderful to have it, but actually, I'd rather young students got much, much cheaper tickets on public transport than I did. I'm sorry, nobody will agree with me, but this is my honest view.
Well, student rail card's the same as a senior rail card, isn't it? 30% off?
No, we have free. We go for free.
Do you?
Yes, you'll soon be there.
No, I am there, but I don't.
You obviously don't travel on public. Shame on you.
I do. I travel by train every day, and I get 30% off.
Tubes in London.
No, tend not to. Tom.
I mean, obviously, I sort of sympathise with what Yasmin's saying. It makes a lot of sense. I don't think I agree, because I don't know. I think back to all of the things that were once universal that are no more, and I do think things that are universal bind the country together. As you say, we are a collective, and we've got rid of those. And I think wasn't it Tony Blair who said, like, public services that are for the poor tend to be poor public services. That's what happens. If people,
quite deep.
Yeah, if people don't think that they're buying into something, it's never going to affect them. It's only going to go to the poor people. Then people stop feeling this like we are part of one society together. And so I think it starts to undermine people's sense of belonging. You get this with child benefit as well. That's been taken away. That was once universal. That was a kind of great Labour left-wing policy that bound everyone together. That's gone.
But they took it away from the poor. They've taken it away from the third child. I mean, this is that policy was
the Conservatives. I think that was the Conservatives.
No, I'm saying now. I'm not saying the Labour took it away. So,
they take it away from the wealthy as well.
Doesn't being a collective mean that you are generous to others, not just wanting everything for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to get it. I probably won't get it until I'm about 70 by the time I retire. But I don't know.
If you're lucky.
If I'm lucky, if I'll get it at all. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, the debate about pensions? Because if you go to France now, The two parties the two blocs that are going to do well in the French elections are the right and the left, and they're both talking about taking the retirement age down to 60. That's their pledge. And so, I mean, that's not going to happen. It might spark a financial crisis, but there are countries that are moving in a different direction.
Charlie.
Well, sounds like I'm on the first Eurostar to France. You're very kind earlier on to single us out as one of the youngest. I'm 34, so I tend not to think about pensions just yet. But I do think that two things I think probably is that changing something from universal to means tested, it always turns out to be more expensive, I think, anyway, because of the administration of opting out or having people that opt out. So it's just something to bear in mind there. And I also I don't believe necessarily that because when you become pensionable age, you might be asset rich, but generally still cash poor. So you still need a pension to pay, to be paid into your weekly bank account to go about your daily, whatever your day is. Even if you're sitting on quite a nice house or apartment somewhere, but you have every right to obviously pass that down to your kids. I mean, that's the whole point of life in some respects. So I don't. I think it could just be too complicated to start taking away from people. There is obviously a concern as the population is growing and as more of us are getting older, and there will be more of an elderly population at a particular time. Where does that money come from? So it's a genuine question, and what do you do with the pie of taxpayers' money, and how do you support those people? But I think for now, it's here to stay.
I love this comment. Another London-centric lefty panellist. Well, Kezia, you cannot be accused of being a lefty, but London-centric would be a bit of a stretch, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was asked earlier how I got here, and I was like, you really want the length of that to be described? Do you have enough time?
Maybe not.
Indeed. Look, I think there are better ways to redistribute wealth between generations than that particular proposition, the idea that you have to take money away from pensioners in order to improve the life chances of young people. I actually think it's a false choice. There's an awful lot we could do to improve the life chances of young people without taking anything away from elderly people who have earned the pension that they've got. But let's bear in mind, the pension system that we have now was born out of the Second World War. It was built in the belief that people would have 3, 5, perhaps 10 years at best in their retirement before they would pass. Now people can expect to live perhaps 30 years beyond their working age, and it's unsustainable because of that. So I do think there are things we need to do to reform the pension system. The age is going to have to rise. I'm 42 since we're declaring ages tonight, so I'm fully expecting, like Tom, to be well into my 70s before I stop working. But we also need to think about things like it tapers off. So why do we go from working full-time to not working at all? Could we design a pension system that allows people to gradually retire over a longer period of time, go down to 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and you'd get some real benefits to the labour market actually from that more flexible approach to work.
Isn't that happening already, though, to an extent?
Not in as organised a fashion as it could be. I think for a lot of people it's optional, it's a choice, it's not something that the structure of the system necessarily encourages. It could, and that's the type of reforms I think you would look at if we were really serious about addressing this issue.
Right, well, you sparked off a good debate there, James. Thank you very much indeed. A WhatsApp question from Matt in Hassocks in West Sussex. What kinds of policies would a Labour government with a so-called supermajority of 100 seats or more introduce, which one with a smaller majority might not? And this goes back to Tony Blair saying that he rather regrets not making the most of his first term when he had a majority of 179 and frankly could have done anything but didn't. Tom?
Planning might be one. Whether that it becomes difficult. It's such a difficult subject for any government to deal with, because if you're elected with a big majority, you're likely to be elected with constituencies where planning is particularly controversial, and that is what the Labour Party have effectively put all their money on. That is the way that they're going to get the economy growing, by loosening planning restrictions to get more commercial and residential building going. And so perhaps the only way this is going to happen is if you suddenly get something completely out of the ordinary. Because I think most Conservative governments have tried, even with big majorities like Boris Johnson's, and they've not been able to. People like Theresa May have opposed it and others. So I think that is potentially something that could be a game changer, particularly when you're talking about the energy revolution, the green energy transition, where you're going to have to start putting pylons across beautiful parts of the country. That is incredibly unpopular. So maybe something like this will will change the country.
Remember, when I was about 5 years old, I used to irritate my parents because on every car journey I would count the pylons that we were going past. Charlie, now your old boss Michael Gove, he will carry the scars of planning on his back, won't he? Because he tried to really radically reform the system, and even he couldn't really achieve it. So do you agree with Tom? This is something that Labour, with a big majority, they could actually grasp.
I do, actually. And I think because of the NIMBYism that there is in certain, particularly Conservative constituencies, where there is a lot of local opposition to having new homes in a particular area that is deemed green and pleasant land. But I think it will... the trouble with planning anyway and building a house, it takes a long time. In terms of getting reforms through, it takes a long time. If you've all of a sudden got a huge supermajority in what used to be former Tory seats or even Lib Dem seats, and you try and rush through planning applications, you could soon find that supermajority in 4 or 5 years' time is heavily diminished. So you've got to choose your battles. But I do think it is a crisis. There is a housing crisis in this country where young people can't get on the housing ladder. We can have a debate about what kind of houses and things people should build. I'm all for flats, particularly in London. And I don't really care about the size of the requirements. If you want to live in London, it's going to be a heavily populated area. You might just have to suffer a bit of a smaller bathroom or bedroom than what you might have had, what you fancied in the sticks. So I think people have got to make that sort of compromise. But ultimately, you've got to get the spades in the ground. You've got to build. I think just a couple of others might be social care, which still seems to dog this country as to how are we going to look after people with most incredible illness, so whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's or any other care. Are we paying our care workers enough? Do we have enough care workers in this country? How are we going to sort that out? Theresa May tried in 2017, but obviously that was the undoing of her manifesto back in 2017. Boris came forward and Rishi tried to come forward, but that still is a thing I think we need to think about seriously.
Kezia.
Well, let's ditch the supermajority chat, because that's absolute baloney, right? It's not a thing, and I defer to Hannah White.
Look at the MRP polls, it could be a thing.
Oh no, Labour could win very handsomely, but this idea that a supermajority means anything in our parliamentary system is complete nonsense. It doesn't matter if Labour have a majority of 60 or 80 or 180. It doesn't change the functioning of power in the way that our parliamentary system...
It does, doesn't it?
I disagree completely, and I've heard Hannah White from the Institute for Government talk very powerfully about this in particular. So I think there's a different question at the heart of what this caller's addressing here, which is about mandates. So this is the type of thing I talk about in pubs with my friends, Iain. Would you rather have 200-seat majority and a very bland manifesto that doesn't commit to do something of the very radical things around building houses or addressing social care or reforming the pension system? Or would you rather have a majority of, say, 60 or 80, but with some really clear policies?
You really need to get some new friends.
I know, right? This is what we talk about, but I find that really interesting.
I'm busy this evening, I'm off.
The question about planning is one about democratic mandates, right? So if the first thing Keir Starmer is asked to do is reform the planning system, you're basically asking him to pee off an awful lot of people very quickly from day one.
So one thing he might have in his manifesto.
Well, it is actually, particularly around housing and energy. But where's the mandate for that? Where's the permission from the people to make these big, bold choices? Now, it's too late for this election, but there's only so much time left for us to grapple with some of these big decisions coming down our way, whether it's climate change, whether it's social care, whether actually it's the fact we have an ageing population and we need people in Britain to have bigger families, or we need to do an awful lot more with migration. And we know how that conversation goes in this country. We're facing some really existential public policy challenges in this country. We're not talking about it.
I think the most depressing thing, actually, in the last few weeks has been, several subjects are not mentioned. Brexit, forget about it. Gaza, let's not mention it. And green. All the green policies, it's only the Green Party that's talking about it. Planet is burning. The planet is on fire. And there is all this caution about... And, I don't agree with Kezia that you should always be wondering about the mandate. Actually, power in politics is about sometimes doing things that people won't applaud you for, to be brave enough to do that. And... increasingly, because we have this fervent press and social media and so on, every single politician tiptoes around the really challenging issues. And I think if they don't take on the big challenge of saving us from destruction, then what's the point?
On that bombshell, we'll go to the news headlines. It's 8:32 on LBC. Do keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. Here's Daryl Jackson.
Rishi Sunak says he's not aware of any other Tory candidates facing investigation by the gambling watchdog. 2 are known to be under scrutiny, with the Prime Minister warning the party will act if any wrongdoing is found. Buckingham Palace says Princess Anne will make a full recovery after suffering minor injuries and concussion on her estate in Gloucestershire last night. She was taken to hospital after she was apparently kicked or butted by a horse. And a murder inquiry is underway in Liverpool after a 19-year-old man was shot and killed. He was targeted on an industrial estate in Aintree last night. LBC weather largely dry this evening, then some cloud and mist later tonight. Patchy rain in the northwest and a low of 11 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:35, Kezia Dugdale, Tom McTague, Charlie Rowley and Yasmin Alibhai-Brown with us, taking your calls and texts. Here's a text from Ken. Will this pro-Putin stuff stick to Nigel Farage? We're going to be talking about this after 9, by the way, so you'll have a lot more opportunity to put your points of view forward on that. I should, in all fairness to Nigel Farage, say that he hasn't been pro-Putin. He's been slightly NATO sceptic, I think is probably the way to put it. Yasmin?
No. Stop defending him.
I'm not defending him. I just
Stop it.
I get the sense that there won't be many people sort of saying anything in his favour in this panel, so that's my job to play
He's
devil's
got
advocate.
the whole of the media world, every time he coughs, they're there to record his cough, getting all this publicity for what? So no, I do think he says he's reached, I think some things. Nigel Farage has always thought he could do and say whatever he wanted. And none of it impacts on his popularity. Well, I think this one is touching a nerve, and a good thing too.
Is it, though? Because there will be, I know from previous experience, there will be a lot of people who agree with him that NATO so-called expansionism gave Putin an excuse to do what he's done in Ukraine.
That's what good-thinking people say and do, and I'm happy to listen to them. When Nigel Farage plays with these big issues and topics, he's doing it for really reasons that, to my mind, don't seem at all thought through or honourable. We've also seen him with, he was on Russia Today. How many times? Nigel Farage. Can you imagine if Corbyn had been on there?
He was.
Yeah.
How many times?
Many.
No.
Well, he was.
Okay,
Well, he was. He literally was.
So why aren't we going for Nigel Farage for the same reason?
It was on the front page of the Mail, wasn't it?
Now, they're coming now. But we all knew. I was often invited on Russia Today, and I said I wouldn't go on. Why didn't he say no? He's had a link with them for a long time, I think.
Okay. We'll stop that one there, just in case we get into legal territory.
No, that's what I think.
Well, I mean, I don't like what he says, personally. I do. I mean, I wrote the book on the 2017 election that you published, and I remember that election and Jeremy Corbyn getting into difficulty on this very same issue. Now, the Tories thought they had him absolutely snookered on this, because he overstepped the line, he revealed what he thought, what he really thought, and he looked anti-British, anti-Western, pro-Putin, all of that. And Jeremy, with Seamus Milne's advice, said, own it, fight back, do not take a step back against the Tories, because British foreign policy is about the worst, least popular thing out there. You know, people do not support it. They're not with the kind of the general, what most of us will probably agree with. So that was really quite radical, and it paid dividends for Corbyn. So I don't think it's absolutely certain that this is going to harm Farage. I just have this scepticism about that.
But if you're a traditional Tory voter, you voted Tory all your life, but you can't stand the current lot, and you're looking for somewhere else to put your cross, and then you hear Farage effectively saying something that they will interpret as being a bit pro-Putin, even if he denies that.
Yeah.
You're less likely to put your cross in the reform box, aren't you?
So I was in Surrey East today, and
you get around, don't you?
Yeah, and we were talking to some down-the-wall Tories, and they brought that up independently. They brought the Farage thing up independently. That said, where is Farage going to win? It's not in Surrey East. It's in Great Yarmouth, or it's in, I don't know where he's standing, on the East Coast. He's not taking necessarily Tory votes directly.
Well, I would say that's even worse in Great Yarmouth, which is a very working-class constituency. Working-class Tories, about as right-wing as you can get, and they're very patriotic. They wouldn't like this kind of talk.
I'm just not sure that it will stick on him. I'm not saying I agree. I just don't think it's going to stick on him that he's anti-British. I think it's going to be a difficult thing to land on Farage.
Okay.
So I think he might get away with it.
Kezia, does Nigel Farage play any role in this election in Scotland?
Actually, he might, yes. So the last time I looked, I might be a little bit out of date here, Reform were polling better than the Greens in Scotland. Now, that doesn't mean for a second I think that they're going to win any seats. But, and I've been boring Tom about this just before the programme started tonight. There's a very different election taking place in Scotland. A lot of the marginal seats are actually between the SNP and the Conservatives. So there is a role in those seats for Reform voters to actually determine the outcome of those elections, because they step away from the Conservatives, they might let the SNP win in those communities. So there is a role for Reform in the Scottish election, although I don't think he's been there in the campaign at all. But look, Nigel Farage is a populist. And what do populists do? They offer cheap, easy solutions to complex problems. And the only way to defeat populism is with the exposure of light. And I don't think this will stick to him before polling day, but it's the beginning of what might happen in the future. And we actually need more people, particularly on the right, to take him on his own terms and expose him for the populist that he is and the dark road that leads us down.
Charlie, I mean, in many ways, Nigel Farage and Reform could determine the size of Keir Starmer's majority in this election. I wonder whether you think this issue is actually going to impact that at all.
Well, I hope it does. I mean, I think it's a major gaffe, and what he said is completely wrong. And, you know, in the absence of...
Because Boris Johnson said the same thing.
Well, in the absence, what I was going to say, in the absence of sort of other political leadership, so, you know, we don't have the most charismatic leader of the opposition currently, and I'm afraid, you know, the current Prime Minister is a bit bogged down in other things, betting scandals and D-Day sort of commemorations where, you know, mud has stuck, where the public might have stopped listening to him. You need a big figure, maybe as larger than life than Nigel Farage, to come out and call it out for what it is what Boris Johnson has done today.
Even though he said the same thing in 2016.
And, you know, I think Boris has obviously maybe worded it in slightly different terms, perhaps, but that was Nigel's sort of counter when he revealed the big front page of the newspaper, I think it was, earlier on, where Boris had claimed to say what he said. But it has taken a big figure, I think, as is right. It needed somebody like Boris to come out and say how just wrong this is. You can be anti-EU. You can, you know, think that the EU was too bloated, it cost too much, money was diverted to the EU and not being spent on communities back home. You can have an issue with immigration because you thought freedom of... Whatever your views about the EU, perfectly legitimate to have. But the idea that post-Second World War, an organisation, either with NATO or whether it was the EU, that was set up to bring peace and harmony across Europe, the fact that it was expanding towards Eastern Europe, as somehow provocative or a provocation, that it somehow justifies that Russia can do what it does, even though Nigel, I know, has said that it's completely wrong. But you either stand up to those bullies or you side with them. And having any kind of justification for what Vladimir Putin has done, or any excuse, or to say, well, I said this 10 years ago, you should have listened to me, we are all responsible. Any of us around this panel responsible for Vladimir Putin and his actions in Ukraine? Anyone listening at home? No. And so the idea that Nigel has been able to lead a party now who claims to be probably the most patriotic party in the country, when he is now talking down the UK and telling us that it's our fault as a West and as a UK that we are responsible for Putin's illegal invasion in Ukraine, when it was this country that opened our hearts and our homes to thousands of people that needed to seek refuge, I think is abysmal. And it's low-rent politics is the most politest way to put it on this radio station. And I'm glad Boris has called it out. And I just hope, because there is that lack of political, I think, comms at the top of politics that we have in this country, I hope people in those constituencies, whether it's Great Yarmouth or Clacton or anywhere who Nigel seems to have a following for reform, I think they might be Conservatives that might have left the party to go and vote for reform. Those people will have a very second look at Nigel Farage and think twice.
Now, writing in the Telegraph, Nigel Farage said he'd never been an apologist or supporter of the Russian president, but that if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised if he responds, which might be referred to as a policy of appeasement.
Well, yes, of course. But that's what he does. He'll always come up with these things, these eye-catching, ear-catching slogans and excuses and so on.
But do you think this will rebound on him?
I think it will. Not in time for the elections. And let's see what a wonderful MP for Clacton he'll turn out to be. He might show up once
every...
You
think he'll be elected?
He might. I think he might get in. And then they'll see. Then he'll know what the job is. It's not standing around being provocative and charismatic and irresponsible, utterly irresponsible.
The problem is, I know I spoke quite a bit about it a second ago, but just as a political leader in terms of communications, if you make a mistake, you can either apologise or you double down. Now, Rishi apologised for the mistake that he made leaving D-Day early. Sir Keir Starmer has sort of apologised for his view about what a woman is and it's going through a bit of a change in its policies. But you can apologise and be upfront with the country about where your head's at. Nigel has decided to double down wrongly, I think, in many, many people's view, and I think that's a mistake. He could have easily just said, what I meant was this, and move on and continue to do what he's doing and gathering the crowds that he is. But he's refusing to do that, and I think that has become a polarising issue, and one which I think and I hope costs him.
Well, we will be talking about that more after 9 o'clock. We're asking, has Nigel Farage blown it? So if you want to call in about that after 9, you'd be very welcome. It is 9:15.
LBC
Apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:47. I'm afraid I have to do this all over again. I think I've read the candidates in Clacton about 7 times so far. Here's another time. Matthew Benison is the Liberal Democrat candidate, Nigel Farage Reform, Craig Jameson for the Climate Party, Tony Mack, an Independent, Natasha Osborne for the Green Party, Jovan Owusu-Nepal for the Labour Party, Andrew Pemberton for the UK Independence Party, and Giles Watling for the Conservative Party. There you go. Right, our next question comes from James in Chelsea. James, hi, what would you like to ask?
Hi, yeah, good evening. Thanks for taking my call. Evening panel. How much of a campaign have the Conservatives got if their campaign manager is on leave?
Yeah, the Director of Campaigning, Tony Lee, has taken a leave of absence after his wife became the second Conservative candidate to come under investigation for allegedly betting on the date the election will be held on. Now, you didn't get a little whisper from Michael Gove, Charlie, and you haven't enriched yourself?
He needs that
He might have whispered the date of the election to you.
Michael has never whispered, I think, to anyone. He's quite vocal in his views most of the time. And no, they didn't. In answer to the question, I mean, I'm not sure there was much of a campaign when the campaign director was there in the first place when it all kicked off, to be perfectly honest. But look, it's not a good look. And I've got to feel... and I think everybody would feel sorry a bit for Rishi Sunak in this particular instance, because the people around him have let him down. The people who have had that information have clearly tried to make a quick buck on it, have now blown up a week of a campaign when you are behind enough as it is. And every day, every second, every campaign stop matters. And so the people around him, I think, really do have questions to ask.
Well, the buck starts with him. I mean, in the end, doesn't it? And you can say, I mean, there have been so many instances where I think you're right, he has been let down in this campaign by plenty of advisors, but in the end, he's the top guy and has to take responsibility.
Well, and, he came into office to say that he wanted to bring integrity and professionalism to politics, and, but he has, was visibly angry, and I'm glad when we saw him in those leadership debates to see him as exercised as he was, and I would like to have seen that a bit earlier on in the campaign, or a few months ago, to share his frustrations when things are going wrong, when things haven't been directly his fault, because then you can genuinely then and legitimately ask the country to look at what he has done in terms of leading the government, and that's his responsibility. So judge him on his decisions, on his leadership. Everyone else that's let him down around because of 14 years of just losing the plot or losing the way of just how to do things are no longer in the party. They are, it is right that the people that have at CCHQ that have allegedly made a buck out of it are no longer there or have taken a leave of absence or whatever. But the show goes on, and the country's fortunes is at stake. It shouldn't just be about those individuals.
And we should say that the latest one, the head of data, Neil Mason, something like that, he's denied any wrongdoing at all. Yasmin?
I am so touched by your loyalty to Rishi Sunak. You must be the last person in this country. I do hope they put you into the Lords for that. The man has made certain... It's not even a mistake. Utterly, one of the things that I begin to think, he's so tired, he wants out. He wants them to lose. He wants to get out of this place. Why would you do one thing after another? An election called too soon, far too soon, right? Everybody agrees that it...
Do they?
Yeah.
I thought most people on the left wanted an election like yesterday.
Well, I'm not off the left. I don't have a formula.
Well, you're not off the right, are you?
No, but I think he did call it too soon for his own party's fortunes. The D-Day thing, all of this completely kind of grubby stuff. And I think he wants to go. I think he wants to lose, and then he flies off in his plane, never comes back, off to California. End of.
Well, I don't think he's done. I don't think he does it deliberately. I mean, he didn't choose the weather when he announced the election, so getting caught in the rain was one thing. I mean, D-Day was obviously... He could have had an umbrella. But I don't think so, actually, because if it was Boris Johnson, we'd all be loving it if he was out there in the rain. It's about the individual and the character. And how
I wouldn't have been loving it at all.
He could, if he was able to make a joke about it, then that might have.
Yasmin has never had love and Boris in the same sentence ever. Kezia.
Look, I think it's too late, in truth. I don't think there's much for campaign managers to do right now. A lot of people have their postal votes, may even have cast them already.
I've just sent mine in.
Well, there you go. You've proved my point. What matters now is the business end of this election, so where the marginal seats are and what's happening on the ground in those respective areas. That's about foot leather, to be honest. It's about a sense of morale and purpose in particular constituencies where it's still a bit too close to call. All the work a campaign manager should have done is well done by now. But look, I think this story is so damaging to the Conservatives because it encapsulates their entire record in one tiny little story. In the event of something historic like the calling of an election, the Conservative response was to make a quick buck at our expense. That really is the totality of their entire record, and that's why it's going to cut through and do them real damage.
It's not the entire Conservative Party. There's 4 people so far. Might be more.
But the thing is, when trust in the Conservative Party is as low as it is, when their record is heavy on them as it is, you can be really quite pejorative about this because people are so sick and fed up. They see that as just the whole party in miniature. I'm not suggesting, Iain, this is fair, but that's how it's consumed and digested by electors now, I think.
Tom?
I mean, it's hard not to agree with both Yasmin and Kezia on that point. It is evidently grubby, isn't it? And I just find it baffling. You know, imagine you found out this piece of information that the election's going to be called the next day for your party, and your first thought is to jump on to Betfair. And it's not like you're going to make a life-changing...
And your second thought isn't, maybe I'll be caught. Yeah. I mean, that's what I find incredible, the stupidity of it.
I know, and so you've risked everything for £100. You've put £100 on, you're going to get, what is it back?
500.
500 back. I'm not saying £500 is not, a significant amount of money, but it's not life-changing, is it? And this is something that he's risked everything for. It's totally baffling. And I do think it smacks of a kind of breakdown of discipline, a breakdown of kind of professionalism at the top. And that is what Rishi was supposed to change. I do think it's hard to imagine this happening under Theresa May or, well, most prime ministers, to be honest, in most times. This is hard to imagine. So it's completely baffling. And I do think it says something about the way that the Tory party is, where it's got to at this point. It's symbolic.
Rishi in Longhurst says, Iain, who did you vote for? Well, I'm very lucky in that broadcasting regulations don't permit me to tell you who I voted for, so I'm not going to. James, thank you very much for that. A text question from Jerry in Scarborough, and I need relatively speedy answers on this one. Lawmakers in America are finally cracking down on the disruptive Palestine protesters, including possibly making it illegal to wear masks in some states. Is it time for a similar robust approach to these tiresome protests on our streets and at our universities here? Now, New York State Governor, who's a Democrat, has discussed clamping down on mask wearing on the New York City subway, with the city's also Democratic governors, while Republicans in the state of North Carolina are set to pass a new law which bans the wearing of most masks in public places, even ones related to COVID. Yasmin.
I'm very, very, very pro the freedom to demonstrate. And I'm with my students at college who are demonstrating. And I've been on several of the marches. So I can't answer this question because it's so loaded. And in my view, it's rubbish. I'm not going to answer.
What about masks on protests, the generality of it?
There aren't many people here wearing masks. There are not. I've been on these marches. They just aren't.
But there are some. Why would you want to cover your face unless you had something to hide?
Well, look, people cover their faces for whatever reason. What I'm saying is they've tried to discredit these marches and get us to shift our position. And none of the political parties are addressing what's happening to Palestinians. So don't get me started on that.
I better not. Tom?
No, I wouldn't clamp down on protests, but I do find a problem with masks. I think that I think it's completely legitimate to go after masks. I find it uncomfortable. I haven't been on one of these marches, so I'm not uncomfortable about those marches, but I don't like seeing people going around in balaclavas on quad bikes or motorbikes and those kind of things around ordinary streets. So I don't see what's wrong with the police going or the law changing on masks.
Okay, Kezia?
Do you know, in all honesty, Iain, I'm not sure what I think about this. I think I need to spend a bit more time contemplating it because, if somebody's wearing a mask, that makes me feel less safe. But do I have a right to feel less safe at the expense of their right to express themselves, and perhaps they're wearing their mask because they fear the authorities and how they'll be treated because of the views that they hold. So I think it's much more nuanced and complex than we perhaps give it credit for. My default position, though, will always be to defend the right to free speech and defend the right to protest.
Charlie?
You're not allowed to wear a mask, I think, in France, where I'm going to, obviously, for my new pension. No, I don't think you should be able to wear a mask. I'm all for it. We are so blessed in this country that you're allowed to protest, where you're not able to do that. You're not allowed to express yourself in many other countries. So it is a plus to be able to protest. But I think when it comes to wearing masks, I think when it comes to university campuses, and you see tent after tent, where there are many, many students who actually might not have a view about, or not know enough about it, but feel as though that university is becoming unsafe. I think it is quite right to.
It's not unsafe.
I'm just saying there'll be some students who do feel as though actually their educational experience is actually being affected and impacted by protests in the libraries or protests in seminars and lectures and things like that. So maybe the laws do need to be slightly toughened up. That shouldn't detract any organised protest that can happen, as it usually does when you organise with the police and the local authority and all the rest of it. But I think there just needs to be a little bit more tightening to make sure that everybody feels safe.
OK, let's move on to our fun question from Maddie in Stratford. A group of tribute acts have been protesting against Facebook and Instagram's owners, London HQ, for deleting their profiles for impersonating others. But if you had to become a tribute act, who would you want to perform as? Charlie?
I'd have to do a tribute to you, Iain. You can't have enough Iain Dale, can you, around the country? Can you see?
That was me thinking you'd say Michael Gove.
Well, I thought that was the obvious answer, so I thought I'd pick a different one. But you, I think that's what the country needs.
Enough, Kezia.
I'm going to go with Neil Kinnock.
Oh, you stole my idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got to give him a big kiss and a cuddle, but just before I came on here. I know. And I love him so dearly. And what I love most about him, well, two things. One, he is a proper romantic, and actually there's a lot of value of that in politics, being able to talk with a degree of lyricism and speak to people in a different way. You get that in spades from Neil. And the other one is he's a man of ideology and big ideas, and I want to hear more of that in politics in the future, and I wonder who the next set of Neil Kinnocks are. So perhaps they'll come to my gig when I'm him, paying tribute to him.
Yasmin?
It can be somebody dead.
It can be anybody.
Barbara Castle, my heroine. I loved her. I think she was an amazing...
Now, for the younger listeners, just explain who she was.
She was...
a great Eurosceptic, Yasmin?
Yeah, she might have been that, and I'm a very pro-European, but what she did for workers' right in Dagenham, what she did for women's right, she was stylish, she was... am I allowed to say sexy?
You are allowed to say.
Sexy.
Harold Wilson certainly thought so.
She was just the best, and I met her. I met her because she was very interested in Uganda, where I come from, and honestly, I had such a girl crush on her. Such a girl crush on her.
What a shame we haven't got much time to examine that in more detail.
Oh God, I've had I had an answer stolen. I think I was thinking back to the Nigel Farage point, and he's having a go at NATO. So I'm going to go with Ernie Bevin, the great Labour founder of NATO, who's working class, trade union leader who ran the British economy basically during the war and was the sort of the best foreign secretary that we've had probably post-Second World War. So I'm going to go for him.
So three of you have picked Labour titans.
Yeah.
Won't sell as many tickets, though.
The Tories are over here.
Ours will be a sellout, Iain.
Many people have accused me of being a sellout, I can assure you. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the General Secretary of the largest teachers' union, the National Education Union, I'm going to pronounce his name right. Daniel Kebede, is that right? Or is it Kebede? Anyway, we'll find out by tomorrow. Kebede it is. The former Conservative MP, Sir Charles Walker, and the Green Party peer and former leader, Baroness Natalie Bennett. They'll be joining us to take your calls at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you to